Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod. My name is Becky Achen, and I'm doing another solo show for you this week. And today's a little bit of a personal connection or sharing of some of the things that have been happening in my classroom. We've talked quite a lot about the use of generative AI on the podcast, all the way back to our very first episode actually was about changing the way that we assess students because of generative AI, which has been over a year and a half ago now. And we've revisited that a few times on the pod, but it's probably something that comes up in almost every conversation that I have with other faculty members. Even honestly, friends working outside of academia ask me about what I think about generative AI and its use within academia and learning. I've talked a ton with family and friends who are seeing how it's being used in the workplace, and it's just one of those things that I think is on a lot of people's minds. Now, we could dive really deep into generative AI, AI agents, AGI, and what that might mean for the world of work. And I think there's a lot of really relevant things that we need to be thinking about in higher ed when it comes to how generative AI is going to impact the job market that our students are entering. We're seeing initial suggestions that some of those entry level first line jobs that typically our college students would fit, maybe some of the first to be replaced or at least reduced. So instead of hiring 5 people in entry level roles, a company might hire 1 or 2 to do the work of 5 by leveraging things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and many of the other AI and large language model built programs and tools that are out there to help make work happen faster. And that leaves, 75% of our students looking for work. And especially for me in a field where it is definitely knowledge work, right? Most of what I do related to marketing and branding is certainly knowledge work. And that's one area where it seems like the experts are talking about there's some replacement coming and coming rather quickly. So those are certainly important conversations to have. It really does force us to think a little bit about the purpose of learning. And this is something that I think has become even more relevant and important to me as I've shifted a little bit away from teaching in sport management and more teaching into branding, marketing, and entrepreneurship, especially when it comes to entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial thinking. Because I'm teaching a lot about problem solving and creativity and how do you boost that and what does that look like in today's world. So it's certainly something that we need to continue having conversations about. It's something that I know I'm thinking about mostly on a daily basis because my job being a teacher is one of those things that is potentially replaceable. So I think a lot about what value do I provide? How do I make sure that what I am giving to students is something that can't be immediately replaced? And what is the true value of me being in the classroom and me building the classes? And that's something that I would encourage you all to start thinking about, and one of the things that we'll talk about in future episodes. But what I want to focus on today is thinking about how AI is showing up in my class. So I love using in class active learning assignments. And in most of my classes, at least once a week in the twice a week classes, but usually in every class period, we do at least one group activity or individual reflection or something that requires them to apply the concepts that we've talked about in class. And the last couple weeks, I've given some of these activities. And in my lesson plan, right, in my mind, these activities will take 10, 15, on a rare occasion, 20 minutes for students to actually work through. And I would assign them. put students in groups, say, get to work, and start walking around the classroom. And I would notice that students were spending a lot of time on Instagram or they were having conversations outside of course content. And so naturally, I do what most of us do in that situation. I asked them if they were done. And most of the time, the answer is yes, we're done. And I looked at how long we've been doing the activity, and oftentimes it's 5 minutes, maybe less. And so I obviously said, how can you be done so quickly? Well, they were taking my in-class activities, putting it into ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to give them a response and calling it good. Now, I don't want to spend the episode going down the rabbit hole of some of the negatives of that, but I also want to recognize, and I really want to recognize that it's not surprising that students would do that, right? It doesn't surprise me that their default mode is to get a answer or a response or an outcome as quickly as possible. Really is human nature to think that way. And I'm also not sure that I want to tell them never to touch generative AI because I do truly believe that we owe it to our students to encourage them to practice using large language models and different AI apps. I think we owe it to them to help them think critically about their use, consider what value they provide when the tools can answer the questions for them, and think about how they can assess and evaluate the outputs that they're getting. And those experiences have led me to be a lot more intentional in how I structure work. Now, I mentioned in the past that for general assignments, I will often write in the assignment, here are some effective ways to use AI in this assignment. And when I do that, I say, if you use them in these ways, you also need to do XYZ as well. And I realized that I wasn't structuring my in class work that way, kind of assuming that, like, if it was happening in class, students weren't just going to outsource the work because I could see them. Hasn't been the case at all. And recognize that I might need to better structure how students use generative AI in the class for a couple reasons. First, to help them process through the concepts and do something to try to learn and retain the information versus, oh, Dr. Achen said we have to do this. We're going to do it. We're done. We'll present it to the class, but we're not overly connected to it. And so I've started to intentionally tell them actually, and I did this just in class this week. I said, okay, our goal is to come up with creative solutions to problems students in college often face. We were talking about entrepreneurial mindset. And so I gave them three scenarios. And their idea, their goal was to pitch an idea, a creative solution to each of these three issues. And they had to share why their decision or their idea was valuable. And in my mind, this was at least a 20-minute activity, maybe longer. And at the start, I laid out what I wanted them to do. And I explicitly said, you can get ideas from generative AI to help you come up with a solution, but not yet. So, first, before you put anything into ChatGPT, I want you to start by just talking to each other, seeing what you, because you are the audience for these problems, you are college students here at the University of Kansas. What do you see as the root of the problem? What is the core thing that is causing this? What are some of the challenges that students might be facing that might be leading to this problem? I want you to just brainstorm together, no technology, for 5 minutes. When those 5 minutes are up, I will tell you what to do next to use an LLM to help you. So we did that. And then 5 minutes was up. And I said, now I want you to put your list of ideas, things that might be making this challenge real or prominent, things that might be underlying issues or causes related to this challenge. And I want you to put those along with the scenario into Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot. And I want you to ask it to help you better understand the problem. Give it what you've already determined or decided or discussed and ask it what is missing. Students did that. They looked at some of the things that the LLM suggested they might think about. I asked them to think a little more critically about whether those are accurate potential root causes from their experience. What evidence do they have that suggests those things may or may not be true or important or useful in this situation? And again, I had them pause and I said, I don't want you to create a solution yet using an LLM. The next thing I want you to do is looking at all this information you have from your own brainstorming and from the large language model, come up with at least two ideas for solutions to this problem. Either a product you can create, a service you can offer, some sort of program that could help fix or improve this situation, this scenario. No generative AI yet. Again, I told them, I promise I will let you use it, but not yet. We did that for 5 minutes. And I said, now I want you to go intentionally to the LLM, put your idea in, and ask it specifically to look at what challenges there might be with your idea, what might be missing or what problems you might run into, and give you suggestions for how to improve upon the idea you already have. Once you do that, evaluate the output, think through whether its suggestions are relevant, valid, or useful, and why. Take what you like, change or edit what you don't. You are welcome to have a conversation back and forth with the model and tell it, like, oh, that was a good idea, but it doesn't exactly work. Here are some of the issues or constraints we have. What else could we do to solve them? I told them the other option would be to put their idea in and ask ChatGPT to improve upon it or to give them specific feedback about whether or not it would work and why. And that process had them engage in the idea creation, but then had them use the models to explore that deeper, to think deeper about it. Now, at the end of this process, they created a pitch. They pitched their ideas to classmates. We had our classmates come up with a list of questions they had about the ideas, things that they might think are problems or issues or challenges with what their classmates came up with. And I didn't ask the students to answer those questions. I just asked them to write them down because we'll revisit them next week and think through how those questions are opportunities and how we might use our own critical thinking and generative AI to help us improve upon the idea that we had and maybe bring it from an idea to something that could actually be implemented. Now, this was in class, it was back and forth. It wasn't perfectly structured, but and it wasn't I didn't write down these instructions, right? We just worked through it together. But it did give students an opportunity to feel like using the tool was allowed, but that they didn't need to actually go directly to it, that they still had to take some time to wrestle with the idea themselves and use ChatGPT in ways different from their typical use, which was putting in the prompt, getting an output, and being done with it. I'm not saying it's perfect or it works every time for every in class assignment, but for me, it has given me the opportunity to talk through different ways. Another thing that I've found quite helpful this semester is actually sharing examples of how I'm using generative AI in both my teaching and my consulting work. So in another class, I talked students through how a previous assessment I had, I didn't love. I didn't think it was helping students really apply the concepts. So I put it into ChatGPT. I told it the problems and issues that I was having with the assignment, gave it 3 or 4 ways that I thought the assignment could be reworked, and asked it to give me some feedback on those ideas, to assess those ideas as to how helpful they might be to reach the goals and improve upon the challenges I was having. Now, 50% of what ChatGPT gave me wasn't super useful, but the other 50 was a really good opportunity for me to have a conversation back and forth about what I did or didn't like, what may or may not actually work because I know my students. ChatGPT doesn't know my students. And then frame how I might actually share the assignment with students and evaluate it. And that really helped me improve upon it, at least so far. I like the first inputs I've gotten from students, the first assessments that have been submitted look much better than the ones in previous years. And I told students about the process. I let them in to see how I'm using the tool to help me think through things that maybe previously I would have just said, "Yeah, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to spend 10 hours doing a deep dive into how I could potentially solve this problem and then think on it and iterate and reflect." I would love to have time for that, but most of us tend to like autopilot things in our classes because we don't have time to prioritize what we might consider recreating the wheel, right? But now I'm tweaking assignments using generative AI in ways I hadn't before, and I'm letting students in on the process. So much so that sometimes I actually show them the chat window and we walk through how I approached it. Now, I think this is really important for reasons I already mentioned, but I see it happen in my consulting work. Just the other day, I was working with a client who had been approached by a salesperson for a product. And they had asked a couple questions of that salesperson, and the response they were given was a copy and paste from ChatGPT. Now, how could one tell? Well, mostly because the structure, also because I put the same question in and it gave me almost a verbatim response with a different company name than the one of the company that was used. And it was just kind of a lazy use of generative AI, right? It didn't show what value the company was adding. It didn't show their expertise or their depth of knowledge because my client could have just gone to ChatGPT and gotten that answer himself. And once he realized he could have just gotten that answer himself, that company, that salesperson just showed the client that they weren't a necessary part of the equation. They didn't need to be there. So why would my client hire them to do that work? And I don't want our students that graduate to be lazy AI users. I don't want them to just outsource the thing and reduce their credibility and not think about ways to intentionally improve what they offer their future clients or partners or employees or bosses without because they aren't thinking about critically how they're using it and how they're using it to improve what they already have to offer. So my encouragement for you is if you are using generative AI in the work that you do as a teacher, or maybe even in a side job, if you're using it at home to help manage your workouts or your weekly menus, share with students how you're approaching your use of generative AI. Walk them through your thought process, how you would evaluate an output, because that is something that is a skill that's taught just like all the other skills we need to teach our students. We often have them in our classes, and one of our goals is build teamwork skills or improve presentation skills. Or maybe we figure by letting them use AI, we'll be improving their AI use skills. But then in reality, we don't build in any time to teach them how to do this or scaffold their experience with the tools or give them feedback or teach them how to evaluate their own outputs. And so we're not really teaching them, right? We're just requiring them to make presentations and use AI, but we're not teaching them how to review, reflect, refine their use so that they can continue to do that forever as they become working professionals and contributing members to their communities and society as a whole. So look for opportunities in your own work to share with them how you're exploring it. If it's helpful for you, try structuring how you want students to engage with it in class assignments, and then telling them that that's also how you want them to engage with generative AI in your out of class assessments. And it seems kind of silly, but what I have noticed is that when I tell students don't use AI yet, they actually don't use AI yet. Because one, I tell them why. I tell them why I want them to do with the task first. And I let them know that they will get to use it when we move further down the process. So try setting it up as more of a process conversation than just not giving them any direction at all or simply saying, don't use it. Have it be part of the process for the way that you engage with in class and out of class work. Now, if you've got a really great way that you've used generative AI or you've modeled generative AI for your students, I would love for you to share either in the comments or send me an email at Becky at theengagedprofessor.com. I'm always happy to help. I love to hear your feedback. It keeps myself and my co hosts and my collaborators working to create and hopefully be helpful in spaces that you all are consuming content. So, thank you for listening. If you haven't already done so, we would love your reviews on any of the podcast apps that you listen to us on so that we can keep getting found by new people and keep spreading the good word about thinking critically about teaching and becoming better teachers to help students learn more and be more excited about college. Thank you for listening to The Engaged Professor, and we'll see you next time.